When we think of America, we often think of freedom, democracy, corporations, capitalism, pride, etc. But what is the best way to understand a country in general? I would say analyzing the philosophical standpoint of a country in terms of politics and economics, or simply political philosophy and economic philosophy of a country. When we learn of economic and political philosophies, the USA is an interesting country to study how a certain economic philosophy works with its political philosophies, how it deals with other nations, especially socialist or communist governments, and how it looks after its citizens. Then we will know for real the philosophy of America. America's political philosophy is committed to individual liberty, democratic governance, and the rule of law. At its core, American political thought concerns people's sovereignty, which was declared in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. This philosophy supports the concept of government that should be selected by the citizens who have sovereignty over the country, so that political power will be held accountable to the people. But the truth is, when we focus on individual freedom under the system of capitalism, it widens the gap between the rich and the poor. Proof? Well, there are a lot. The Matthew effect. Simply put, the rich gets richer and the poor gets poorer, can be seen in the Netherlands housing market. The economic capital accumulation is made by property owners in the major cities such as Amsterdam as property value greatly rose. This gives them the edge to be able to invest in more properties and thereby accumulate even more wealth. On the other hand, those who do not own property find it difficult to enter the market due to the high cost and scarcity of decent and affordable housing. This cycle of benefit for property owners and obstacles for others highlights how laissez-faire capitalist systems lead to worsened inequality. This raises a critical question. What point do individual rights and liberty make when it is under a capitalistic system, where the rich have privileges, thus giving them the upper hand, and the poor experience setbacks, where they don't have the privileges? In the system, even access to basic necessities like healthcare, education, and housing is determined by one's economic status. The promise of individual liberty becomes hollow for many Americans. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against individual liberty and rights. In fact, I'm totally in support of these ideas. But when you have individual liberty and rights under a capitalist system, it opens the door for oppression of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie. I would say that true freedom and democracy can only be achieved when there is a focus on collective welfare and social justice, which can be achieved under a socialistic system. This means implementing policies that address systemic inequalities such as universal healthcare, affordable housing, and robust public education systems. An interesting fact is that since the independence of USA, it has been 248 years, and it has been at war for 231 of them. This can give you an idea of how US foreign policy works. You would think that America's foreign policy at its core aims to promote national security, economic prosperity, and spread of democratic values around the world. But is that the case? US foreign policy has not always been purely altruistic. People argue that America's actions on the global stage often prioritize its own strategic and economic interests, sometimes at the expense of other nations' sovereignty and well-being. Nowhere is this more evident than in its dealings with Middle Eastern and Latin American countries. In the Middle East, the countries that had US interventions have had profound and often destabilizing effects. Why, if you ask? Well, you would probably know why. Oil and the straw man countering terrorism has led to military interventions in countries like Iraq and Afghanistan. These interventions, while aimed at promoting stability and democracy, have often resulted in prolonged conflicts, civilian casualties, and regional instability. Another example is that the US has been the largest provider of military aid to Israel. This aid has included advanced weaponry and military technology, which Israel had used in various conflicts and military operations in the occupation of Palestinian territories. People argue that this support has enabled Israel to maintain its military occupation and conduct operations that have resulted in the oppression of Palestinians and has caused many human rights violations. Well, there has been an ongoing genocide of Palestinians, in case if you didn't know. In Latin America, US foreign policy has often been characterized by interventions aimed at protecting American economic interests and countering perceived threats of communism. During the Cold War, the United States supported coups and authoritarian regimes in countries like Guatemala, Chile, and Nicaragua. undermining democratic movements and contributing to political repression and human rights abuses. The US backed coup in Chile in 1973, which led to the overthrow of democratically elected President Salvador Allende, is a stark example. The subsequent military dictatorship of General Augusto Pinochet, supported by the US, was marked by widespread human rights violations, including torture, disappearances, and executions. There are many such instances where the US has been breaking the international rule of law and performing such atrocities in countries like Cuba and other Latin American and Middle Eastern countries. The economic philosophy of America is deeply rooted in principles of free market capitalism, individual entrepreneurship, and limited government intervention in the economy. But the greatest bullshit that the capitalists have ever served is the concept of laissez-faire capitalism, or a capitalistic economic system where the government abstains from its involvement in the workings of the free market. People argue that unrestricted capitalism can worsen income inequality, concentrate wealth in the hands of a few, corporate dominance, and environmental degradation. Historical examples such as the Great Depression, the 2008 financial crisis, and the upcoming climate crisis highlights the risks of capitalism. In those instances, deregulation caused economic failures. It showed that there was more to regulating an economy than just allowing free market forces to reign it. Furthermore, laissez-faire capitalism can neglect societal needs. This includes universal healthcare, free or subsidized education, affordable housing programs, and robust unemployment benefits that are not profitable in the short term. These measures aim to reduce income inequality, support vulnerable populations, and provide opportunities for upward mobility, countering the disparities worsened in the case of unchecked capitalism. Discrimination based on race, gender, age, disability, sexual orientation, and other factors persists in the American workplace. As of 2020, women in the United States earned approximately 82 cents for every dollar earned by men, according to data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. The pay gap is more pronounced for women of color and women with disabilities. A study by the Williams Institute found that 20% to 47% of LGBTQIA+ individuals experience employment discrimination in some form. Workplace discrimination and harassment can have profound effects on mental health, contributing to stress, anxiety, depression, and reduced job satisfaction. The empowerment of workers through strong labor rights, collective bargaining, and workplace democracy is the solution for worker-related problems, and policies that support fair wages, safe working conditions, and protection against exploitation. The value of the worker within an economy and the incorporation of the worker in decision-making leads towards the betterment of all, thus establishing a healthy economic system coupled with a strong and more inclusive social system, as well as a stronger system of governance. America is a very good example of how poorly a capitalist system works because of its internal contradictions. When the ruling class, that is the bourgeoisie, tries to show the American dream, the focus shifts towards addressing root causes of inequality, promoting solidarity across diverse communities, and envisioning a society where the well-being of all individuals is prioritized over profit and power. As Karl Marx said, accumulation of wealth at one pole is therefore at the same time accumulation of misery, the agony of toil, slavery, ignorance, brutality, mental degradation at the opposite pole. By embracing transformative reforms that challenge capitalist norms and uphold human rights, America can move towards a more just and inclusive future where prosperity and liberty are shared equitably with every citizen of the world. Just think about this. If USA becomes socialist or communist, how many of world problems would be solved?